The Vanishing of Elias Thorne, a desert mystery.
Night in Scottsdale spread like black velvet, stitched only by the yellow pools of streetlights and the silhouettes of modern houses against the desert sky. Elias Thorne, 30 years old, a game designer once tipped for greatness, steered his black pickup along empty streets, his face softened and half hidden by the cabin light. His hands gripped the wheel as if clinging to something he couldn't name. The radio hummed a melancholy tune and then fell away into silence. His phone lay dark, notifications reduced to shadows of canceled meetings. To an outsider, it would have been a routine visit to his mother. But every small motion, every refusal to stay the night, every evasive answer about the project felt like ink fading from a map that was being erased. That night, when Elias said he needed to grab equipment from a warehouse and insisted on returning to Scottsdale immediately, was the last time anyone saw him step back into the dark. If you want to lift the first veil of this story, to trace every tiny clue and not let a single detail slip through, subscribe to Missing and Mysterious and turn on notifications. Because in this fog, even the smallest memory can be the piece that breaks the case. Elias arrived at the warehouse just after midnight, headlights cutting through the thin desert air. The building was one of those low-slung corrugated structures that hum with the sound of distant refrigeration and the loneliness of things stored away. He parked, killed the engine, and for a few seconds, the world shrank to the hiss of the cooling vents and the pulse in his ears. Then, he walked to the heavy metal door and punched in the code he'd used 100 times before. The keypad blinked red. He tried again. Red. Again. Red. The repetition transformed his breath into short, shallow gasps. His fingers trembled despite himself. For reasons no one could later explain, the numbers he knew by heart failed him. The logs show, fragmentedly, that he stood there, hands hovering over the pad, trying a dozen times, until dawn. At 6 a.m., the door finally relented. Elias entered and stayed inside for nearly 2 hours. The last confirmed sighting of him on site was at 8:30 a.m., just as the morning washed the desert in pale gold. It's a small window of time, but it's the hinge of the entire mystery. Why could a man who knew a code perfectly well keep entering it incorrectly, only to be let in hours later? Was he frightened, disoriented, sleepwalking? Or did something, or someone, interfere with his mind or his will? If you want detailed timestamps, audio clips, and slow-motion breakdowns of every move Elias made that night, subscribe to Missing and Mysterious. We'll line up the evidence, second by second, so you can judge for yourself. When Elias failed to return that morning, his mother's worry bloomed into action. Calls went unanswered. Texts showed as sent but not delivered. The first pang of alarm arrived with a neighbor who noticed the pickup still missing from the driveway. Then a flurry of frantic calls to friends and co-workers. By midday, someone had alerted the warehouse manager, who pulled the security logs. The keypad history showed Elias's repeated attempts and the door's final open time. But when the family asked for the surveillance footage, the feed that should have kept a cold, mechanical record of movements was empty, wiped clean. Every camera between Scottsdale and the warehouse that should have tracked his route had a gap. It was as if someone had reached into the timeline and erased a single thread. Panic is a contagion. Where doubt spread, questions multiplied. How could footage vanish from multiple independent systems at roughly the same window? Who could access those recordings? And why would Elias, a man organized enough to run complex code and manage servers, vanish without leaving a single log in the places he'd certainly passed through? The absence of images became a presence of its own. A dark, humming absence that sounded like a warning. Late that night, a neighbor sent the family a shaky clip from a doorbell camera near the warehouse. It was only a few seconds long, low res and grainy. At first glance, nothing remarkable. But when you slow it down the way detectives and podcasters do, the clip reveals a small, strange detail. At 5:57 a.m., barely visible in the distance, A shape moves. Not like a person walking, but like something shifting the air itself. A distortion that does not cast a clear shadow. The clip alone could be dismissed as artifact, as glare or compression. But in a case where every normal explanation fails, even a video artifact becomes a possible clue, and every skeptic is forced to keep one eye open. The first responders arrived with standard procedures: notes, photos, a checklist. Yet, even in those early hours, small things felt off. Timestamps that didn't line up, a missing entry in the fuel log of a nearby station, a pump that should have registered a sale but showed none. Elias's financial accounts showed an odd, sudden quiet. No transactions, no activity on the cards he'd used daily. His phone plan lapsed without notification. These were not signs of someone planning a fresh start. They were scratches across a glass pane, each one asking, did Elias leave by choice, or was he taken? We'll unpack every one of these details. The silent phone records, the missing footage, the neighbor's clip, and the tiny inconsistencies that make a normal explanation impossible. If you want the timeline with overlays, the slowed footage, and the forensic notes from the first 48 hours, subscribe to Missing and Mysterious and press the bell. In mysteries like this, watching closely is not optional. It's survival. By evening, the story had spread beyond the family's circle. A simple missing person post turned into a thread that wound across feeds and forums. Strangers messaged offers to help. A few questioned whether Elias had run away. Most simply wanted answers. The family organized searches, scanned the desert with flashlights and borrowed drones, and posted lists of places he frequented. Volunteers drove out at dawn, boots scuffing the sand where Elias's footprints might have been. Reporters circled like scavengers, hungry for a lead. Every hopeful call ended with the same hollow echo: nothing. Then came the digital oddities, the things that felt less like clues and more like eyes in the dark. Friends kept noticing Elias's accounts behaving as if he were still there. A Snapchat message would show opened, though no one admitted opening it. An old group chat would mark his presence for a split second and then go dark. Someone swore they received a late-night scene notification from a photo Elias had supposedly sent the week before he vanished. The pattern unnerved people more than any physical evidence. It suggested not only disappearance, but someone or something. Watching from inside that disappearance. That same night, as the family sat around the kitchen table mapping out routes and timelines, a plain envelope arrived on the doorstep addressed to Elias's mother. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed the warehouse door at dawn, slightly ajar, pale light spilling through the crack. No writing, no fingerprint, just the image, grainy and out of focus, like a question left hanging. No one claimed responsibility. No one knew who had taken it, or why they had chosen to send it that night. The Polaroid became the pivot of the household's fragile hope. Proof that someone had been there. Proof that Elias had not simply dissolved into the desert. But it was also a menace. A silent message implying that someone could step into his life and step back out again, leaving only an echo. If you want to hold that Polaroid up to the light with us, to hear the voices of those who found it, and to examine every pixel for fingerprints and anomalies, stay with Missing and Mysterious. Hit subscribe and the bell. There are more images, more files, and more questions waiting on the next segment. The fog is just beginning to thin, and what emerges next will change everything. Days folded into nights, and the household's fragile hope hardened into obsession. The Polaroid sat on the kitchen table like a tiny, insoluble sun. Everyone who looked at it felt both warmed and burned. The family pushed the precinct harder. The online thread swelled with theories. Some cruel. Volunteers mapped routes on shared satellite images, threaded coordinates into group chats, and argued over whether to trust anonymous tips. The name Elias Thorne began to echo in corners of the internet that trade in sleepless speculation, late-night live streamers, a couple of podcasters with curious followings, and a ragged army of amateur sleuths swarmed the case like moths to a suddenly dangerous flame. Yet even as more eyes turned toward the empty places on the map, the question at the heart of it all remained. Who or what erased the trail? Each new person who asked that question only broadened the silence. Phone records, CCTV gaps. A Zippo left beside a burnt-out pickup, the missing steering column. They stacked like unsolved equations on a chalkboard no one could read. The family learned to live by small rituals, checking message threads at dawn, comparing notes, printing maps, and placing pins. Hope, anger, and exhaustion braided together until they were indistinguishable. Then, 6 days after Elias vanished, someone on the other side of the state posted a picture that stopped an entire town from breathing. It was a grainy photo taken in a canyon none of them had ever expected him to reach. In the image, a pickup lay blackened and skeletal in the sun. Personal items were scattered like pages torn from a life. The photograph was raw, unsigned, taken by people who stumbled onto it while chasing light and landscape. Photographers who had no reason to hunt human stories and yet had found one. That single image rippled outward like a stone tossed into still water, and every ripple carried the same, new, terrible possibility. This was no simple disappearance. If you want the slow reveal, every frame, every timestamp, every voice that picked up the story before anyone else, stay with Missing and Mysterious. Subscribe and enable notifications. We'll walk into that canyon with the cameras and the questions. The fog has a shape now, and what we find next will force us all to choose which side of the light we stand on. As weeks stretched into months, the story hardened into two parallel truths. The facts you could touch, and the noises that haunted the edges of those facts. The tangible pieces, the Zippo, the Polaroid, the burnt pickup, the hacked-out CCTV windows, collected dust in boxes and folders. The intangible ones multiplied. Whispers on forums, late-night call-ins to podcasts, a map stitched from rumors that threaded coordinates no official agency would admit were related. An amateur cartographer in a subreddit, someone who described himself as just obsessed with maps, took the Polaroid, geo-referenced the background light, and posted a crude overlay that suggested the warehouse faced an axis of mountains older than the town itself. A podcaster with a small but hungry audience dug through public missing person reports and found a pattern. 3 vanishings in the last 2 years with similar gaps in footage, similar signatures of interference. Each time someone pushed the theory farther, authorities pushed back with polite denials and procedural fences. The family learned the shape of institutional dismissal, sympathetic words at the press conference, bureaucrating forms that circled the issue without ever closing it. Then came the sound file. It arrived anonymously to the family's detective. A short recording pulled from the shattered laptop found at the truck. The file was badly corrupted, peppered with clipping and hiss. For the first 10 seconds, there was nothing but the low hum of some machine. Then, at 0012, a sound rose. Not a voice, not quite a wind. A layered breathing modulation that made the hairs on the back of listeners' necks stand up. When audio analysts slowed it down and filtered the noise, a recurring pulse appeared beneath the hiss, a pattern like tapping. Then a pause, then tapping again. As if someone were spelling something out in Morse from the inside of silence. No one could say whether it was a call for help, a trap, or evidence of a mind fracturing under pressure. But the tape changed the conversation. It made the invisible audible. The public, long content to scroll past, now pressed in. Donations to the family's crowdfund rose. Volunteers brought new equipment. Online sleuths traded notes and created timelines that no single investigator could maintain alone. The case radiated outward, pulling more curiosity, more grief, more obsession into its orbit. And yet, for all the noise, one fact refused to yield. There had been no body, no DNA. The scorched metal of the pickup was taken away. The last physical trace was gone. In its place lay a question that tasted like iron in the mouth. If someone wanted Elias gone, why leave a trail of objects so obvious they would scream, "Look here"? Was it a breadcrumb to be followed, or a mockery left by whoever had the power to erase? If you want to hear that corrupted file played slowly with notes from the analysts, to see the map overlays, and the listener-submitted timelines, join us on Missing and Mysterious. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll lay the audio next to the Polaroid, frame by frame. The fog is talking now. We must learn its language. Weeks later, when the public noise had begun to settle into a low, hungry hum, a new object wound its way into the story. Small, almost dismissible, and yet impossible to ignore once seen. A volunteer searcher found a strip of fabric snagged on a thorn bush near the canyon, half buried in dust. It was not from any of Elias's clothes. The weave was coarse, stamped with a faded emblem that no one recognized. A circle split by a single vertical line, like a needle piercing a coin. The fabric carried grit, a faint scent of smoke, and a microscopic smear of something that the lab couldn't immediately identify. When the sample finally made its way to a forensics technician, after bureaucratic delays and jurisdictional bickering, the result was unsettling. Traces of a rare industrial compound used in specific manufacturing processes, plus fibers that matched no catalog textile in their database. Someone, or some group, had materials and knowledge beyond ordinary reach. The emblem, once digitized and circulated among online sleuths, began to surface in obscure corners. A blurred patch on a highway sign and a photo from 2 years prior. A faded etching in the background of a security still 5 towns away. Coincidence or signature? The pattern unnerved specialists and armchair detectives alike. It was the kind of clue that changes the scale of a case. What had been a disappearance flared into implication. An organized hand, a symbol repeated like a signature, and methods that suggested planning rather than panic. The family received the news in the form of late-night texts and terse phone calls. For the first time since Elias's vanishing, they felt that the net was being drawn outward. But toward whom and why remained terrifyingly unclear. If you want the high-resolution scans of the emblem, the lab notes, and a breakdown of where it's been spotted, come with us on Missing and Mysterious. We'll trace the symbol's ghost until it either explains the pattern or swallows it whole. On a rainless night that felt too still for the desert, the family woke to a sound at the door. A soft, calculated knock, 3 beats, pause, 2 beats. Rhythmic enough to feel deliberate. No one outside the household knew that sequence meant anything. Inside, Elias's younger sister, half asleep and wired with caffeine and fear, answered the door. There was no one there, only a thin, rain-proof envelope lying on the welcome mat. Inside, a folded sheet of plain paper, and, pressed between pages, a single line of typewritten words. We keep what belongs to us. Look where the light fractures. No signature, no return address. The message was small, but its effect was immediate and corrosive. Journalists smelled a new lead. Online forums lit up with frantic decoding attempts. Some read it as a taunt. Others saw it as a clue. Look where the light fractures. The Polaroid? The warped CCTV frames? A mirror? Volunteers revisited the canyon with polarized lenses and new cameras. An independent videographer sent in footage shot through a prism, searching for anomalous reflections. Underneath the scrabble of hypotheses, the family felt the heavier truth. Someone was talking directly to them, playing by rules they did not make. That night blurred into a dozen sleepless ones. New messages came. A voicemail with low static and a breathing pattern that matched the corrupted audio. An anonymous tip about a storage unit rented under a false name in a neighboring county. A blurry snapshot of a shelf with boxes, one marked with the same faded emblem from the fabric. Each piece piled into the same portable jigsaw. And each new link deepened the feeling that the story was no longer theirs to solve alone. A structure was revealing itself, a network of objects, places, and rituals that hinted at something older and more deliberate than a single chance or crime of passion. We'll follow those leads in the next segments. The voicemail transcribed and slowed, the storage unit's contents cataloged, and the network map built from dozens of small confirmations. If you want to be in the room when each door opens, and to hear the first sound from inside, subscribe to Missing and Mysterious and turn on notifications. The fog is pulling back in places. Be ready for what appears in the light. The storage unit was a gray rectangle in an industrial park 2 towns over. Anonymous, windowless, easy to miss, and easy to ignore. When the private investigator and a squad of volunteers pried it open under a subpoena-like pressure, the lock yielded with a soft, dull click. Inside, a handful of cardboard boxes, a folding chair, and a single steel shelving unit. Most boxes held nothing beyond the ordinary. Canned goods, a coil of rope, a stack of weathered magazines. But one box caught the investigator's breath. Its lid had been slit cleanly, and tucked inside were several Polaroid-style photos, each showing places tied to Elias's life. The warehouse door, the burned pickup from afar, a coffee shop where he used to sketch. Slid beneath the photos was a folded receipt with a rental name that didn't match any person in the town, and a timestamp that lined up with the night Elias disappeared. The rental ledger told a story of careful planning, payments made in cash, staggered dates, and a trail of small sums that looked intentionally unspectacular. Whoever rented the unit had covered the administrative tracks. Fake name, burner phone references, internet access routed through public Wi-Fi logs. But no one had counted on the human impulse to leave a mark. On the underside of the shelving was scraped a faint symbol, the same circle and vertical line found on the fabric. That tiny etching turned the anonymous unit into a signature nailed to a map. Evidence that had been meant to be hidden now pointed, unmistakably, to an organized hand operating with ritual precision. If you want to see the storage inventory, zoom into the Polaroids and watch as we cross-reference the timestamps with public camera logs. Subscribe to Missing and Mysterious. We'll show you how a small, supposedly insignificant unit became a linchpin in the investigation. The corrupted audio file was handed to specialists with the same mixture of hope and dread that people hand fragile things they want to believe. At normal speed, it sounded like static and a far-off machinery hum, useless to most ears. But when analysts slowed it, filtered it, and isolated frequencies, patterns emerged like a fingerprint beneath noise. There was a staccato tapping, soft and methodical, interleaved with a breath-like modulation. Some experts heard a crude Morse-like rhythm. Others suggested an electronic device looped into the recording. The tapping, when translated into short and long groupings, yielded fragments that could be read as letters, ambiguous, fist-sized hints that begged interpretation rather than offered certainty. A linguist on the team warned against confirmation bias. In low-quality audio, the mind will fill silence with sense. Yet several independent analysts converged on the same cluster of possibilities. 3 short taps. Pause. 2 long taps. A pattern that echoed the knock at the family's door. The coincidence sharpened paranoia into purpose. Whoever had left those signals knew how to write in sound, to layer messages on the edge of perception, so that only those who listened carefully could catch them. The question became not just who could send such a message, but who trained the recipient to understand it. We'll publish the slowed annotated waveform with expert commentary and invite listeners to hear what the analysts heard. Subscribe to Missing and Mysterious and turn on notifications. In this case, hearing is as crucial as seeing. With the emblem now confirmed at multiple sites, the case went from local anomaly to an emerging pattern. We traced sightings of the symbol across months and miles, graffitied on a gas station column, faintly burned into the plywood behind a shuttered storefront, photographed in the reflection of a shop window 2 towns over. Overlaying the sightings on a map produced a lattice. Lines connected canyon to warehouse, warehouse to a string of storage units, the storage units to a quiet stretch of highway dotted with tow yards and unofficial transfer stations. The pattern suggested logistics, movement corridors designed to avoid major checkpoints, places where objects could be left and later retrieved. A map expert pointed out something colder. The symbol's placements avoided population centers and sat instead at the margins where jurisdictional responsibility blurs. That intentional placement meant the group, if it was a group, understood how to exploit bureaucratic seams. Online researchers poured through archival images, traffic cams, and municipal permits. Volunteers drove the routes at odd hours. Each new match made it harder to dismiss the emblem as a prank. It was a breadcrumb trail and a declaration. Whoever used it wanted certain people to see, and others to look the other way. We'll share the interactive overlays and a narrated route walkthrough so viewers can trace the pattern themselves. Subscribe to Missing and Mysterious. The map is the story here, and every pin raises another question. New witnesses began to surface, not as definitive answers, but as splinters of perspective. A truck driver remembered seeing a black pickup on a service road at an odd hour, but thought nothing until the burned photo circulated. A storage facility clerk recalled a customer who paid in small, marble falls mime, hemophoreal falls. Falsmond avoided eye contact. An off-duty officer mentioned a late-night call about suspicious loading near a transfer yard, a call that had been logged then downplayed. None of these accounts perfectly fit. Memories conflicted on times, descriptions, and motives. Yet together, they formed a collage. Different angles of the same dark shape. Contradiction, as it turned out, can be its own kind of truth. Inconsistencies pointed investigators to places records alone could not. A service road that didn't appear on some maps. A towing company with a hole in its transfer log. A gas station whose CCTV had been offline for maintenance the week of the disappearance. Each conflicted testimony pushed the inquiry into the margins where bureaucracy frays and people make errors or deliberate erasures. The case was no longer merely physical evidence. It was woven through human error, forgetfulness, and the choices people make to protect themselves or someone else. We'll present recorded interviews, annotated timelines showing where witness statements diverge, and the raw logs that expose the seams. Subscribe to Missing and Mysterious and follow the threaded testimony. Sometimes the gaps between stories are the clearest map of intent. When the fragments were assembled, storage ledgers, the emblem trail, the corrupted audio, and scattered witness accounts, a network began to outline itself. Names surfaced, sometimes only partial, attached to burner phones or mismatched addresses. Financial traces hinted at a shell game. Small transactions moving through pawn shops, prepaid cards, and courier services that blurred origins. A mechanic's receipt connected the burned pickup to a garage 3 counties away. A shipping manifest, half-filled, listed a delivery to a defunct warehouse with a lock still bearing the scratched emblem. The picture was not of a lone figure, but of coordination. Multiple hands passing objects, laundering presence through layers of anonymity. A criminologist we consulted compared it to old smuggling routes. Not sophisticated enough to be invisible, but clever enough to survive oversight. Each link was tenuous, deniable, but together, they formed a scaffold strong enough to move something, or someone, without leaving a clean trail. We'll release the reconstructed network map so viewers can trace the nodes and decide if this was organized crime, ritual network, or something stranger. Subscribe to Missing and Mysterious, because sometimes the shape of absence is the loudest signal. The investigation's tempo shifted the night a sealed envelope arrived at the private investigator's office. No return address, no postage, just slid under the door. Inside, a single USB drive and a handwritten note that read, "You're looking in the wrong direction. Start with what was left behind." The USB contained shaky video footage, clearly shot on a handheld device showing the inside of a dim storage space. The camera lingered on a tarp, then pulled it back to reveal not a body, not drugs, but a mural. The same emblem, painted large across concrete, surrounded by chalk marks like coordinates or ritual glyphs. In the corner of the video, for only a second, a booted foot stepped into frame. Black leather, industrial tread, then gone. The clip cut abruptly. The message was ambiguous, but the effect was decisive. Someone inside the network wanted to redirect the narrative. Whether it was a warning, a breadcrumb, or misdirection, it proved the family's search had struck a nerve. They were no longer digging through the past. They were trespassing on someone's present. We'll analyze the mural frame by frame, enhance the coordinates, and cross-reference the boot with known suppliers. Subscribe to Missing and Mysterious. This is where evidence stops whispering and starts to shout. The confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. Late one evening, as Elias's sister left a community meeting, a man approached her in the parking lot. He didn't threaten, didn't shout. He simply said, "Stop digging. Some doors are locked for a reason." Then he walked away, blending into the rows of cars. The private investigator traced the license plate of a vehicle seen idling nearby, but the records led to a company that dissolved 5 years earlier. Layers upon layers of vanished identities. The family realized they weren't just being ignored by officials, they were being monitored. Every question they asked seemed to echo back, distorted, as if someone else was deciding what answers they were allowed to hear. For the first time, fear eclipsed grief. They weren't only searching for Elias anymore. They were fighting for their own safety. And yet, paradoxically, that fear pushed them deeper. Because if someone wanted them silent this badly, then the truth had to be larger than anyone imagined. Subscribe to Missing and Mysterious as we follow the trail into the shadows, where warnings turn into open challenges. Motives began to surface, fragmented and conflicting. Some pointed to money. Elias's unfinished project may have contained code valuable to black markets. Others whispered of ritual, the emblem's resemblance to archaic symbols tied to desert cults and forgotten lodges. A third theory linked it to control, silencing a voice that had uncovered too much in the digital world. Each motive explained part of the puzzle, yet none explained all of it. Why the burned vehicle staged with scattered belongings? Why the erased surveillance across multiple states? Why the mural, drawn not in secret, but as if meant to be found? The deeper the theories ran, the more they resembled mirrors, reflecting back more questions than answers. This is the heart of the mystery. Not only what happened to Elias Thorne, but why. Until that why is uncovered, every piece of evidence is both a clue and a trap. Join us on Missing and Mysterious as we peel back the layers of motive friva and sirur. Samuromavai mesurer, Saminer mi kerer, Samjitsun sur Kurodin deweri, Surishtomanikio miada bendeber waigir, Smarv, Wainarkoshuil, power, ish, for a tibuar, and ask, which one demands silence at all costs? The climax arrived not in courtrooms or headlines, but in the desert itself. Investigators followed coordinates enhanced from the mural and arrived at a windswept canyon. Hidden in the sandstone was another storage vault, older and more weathered. Inside lay fragments of journals, Elias sketches, half-finished code algorithms, and pages describing voices and static. Signals he believed were not random, but messages. Was Elias documenting a descent into paranoia? Or had he stumbled onto transmissions that someone wanted silenced? The canyon walls carried an eerie echo. Even in daylight, whispers seemed to ride the wind. It was here that pursuit of fact became indistinguishable from pursuit of myth. Subscribe to Missing and Mysterious, because the desert still keeps its secrets, and tonight you'll hear them breathe. After the canyon discovery, authorities finally reacted, not with an expanded investigation, but with removal. The vault was sealed off, the journals cataloged as personal effects, and access denied. Officials claimed it was for safety, but to the family, it felt like erasure all over again. The community response was different. Amateur sleuths recreated Elias's code online, feeding his algorithms into audio databases. What emerged were patterns, repeated intervals across police frequencies, aviation chatter, even deep space signals. If coincidence, it was a cosmic one. If intentional, it was chilling. On Missing and Mysterious, we'll show you what the algorithms revealed and let you judge if Elias was decoding chaos or uncovering design. Unanswered questions multiplied. Who erased the surveillance across state lines? Who staged the burned truck? Why did law enforcement dismiss clear signs of foul play? And most unsettling, who sent the USB? And why show the mural at all? Every mystery leaves a residue. In this case, it was not only grief, but distrust of systems, of evidence, of the idea that truth is accessible at all. Families of other missing persons began contacting the Thornes, recognizing echoes of their own unsolved tragedies. Elias's story was no longer one family's pain, but part of a darker pattern. The aftermath reached a bitter conclusion when the burned truck, the last tangible evidence, was quietly scrapped by local authorities. To the family, it felt like the mystery itself had been fed into a shredder, yet memory resists destruction. Digital archives, independent notes, and the voices of those who refuse to forget keep the story alive. Elias Thorne may be missing, but his absence has become a map, pointing not only to what happened, but to how society treats the vanished. This isn't an ending. It's a handoff. From silence to those willing to listen. What began as one family's tragedy soon echoed abroad. Reports surfaced of identical emblems scratched into walls from abandoned subway stations in Eastern Europe to rural barns in South America, each tied in whispers to people who had vanished without trace. Was this coincidence or evidence of a hidden network operating across continents? The mystery expanded, pulling Elias's disappearance into something larger. A puzzle not bound by geography. Subscribe to Missing and Mysterious, because some symbols cross borders, and some borders mean nothing at all. Then came the digital ghost. Months after Elias vanished, his old accounts flickered online. A playlist updated, a private folder accessed. The logins traced back not to his hometown, but to servers scattered overseas. Hack, hoax, or was Elias somewhere still alive? Each alert sent his family spiraling between hope and dread. Technology, meant to connect, became another haunting. To separate madness from meaning, we gathered voices. Cryptographers tested Elias's algorithms. Psychologists analyzed his journals. Criminologists examined the timeline of events. Their conclusions diverged. Some saw obsession, others foresaw conspiracy. But in every debate, one fact returned. Elias's work was unfinished. And unfinished work leaves doors open. When investigators mapped disappearances alongside the emblem sightings, the result was chilling. Lines stretched across states, oceans, borders, converging on regions of conflict, secrecy, and shadow industries. Patterns are powerful. They turn random tragedies into connected dots. And once you see the shape, you can't unsee it. Through it all, the Thorne family refused silence. They spoke at vigils, organized searches, confronted officials on live broadcasts. Each word carried both love and defiance. To them, Elias was not a case file, but a brother, a son, a life unfinished. In their grief, they forged resolve to fight not only for Elias, but for every name slipping into statistics. Authorities, meanwhile, grew quieter. Requests for files were denied. Journalists faced no comment. The more the family pushed, the more doors locked. Silence became the loudest answer. But silence speaks. It suggests fear or complicity, or truths too volatile to admit. In mysteries like these, what isn't said often matters more than what is. Then, just as the trail dimmed, a new lead emerged. An anonymous message pointed investigators to a different canyon, deeper in the desert. Coordinates, a timestamp, and 3 words: not finished yet. Was it a taunt? A trap? Or the hand of someone still fighting for Elias? No one knows. But it reignited the case, a spark in the ashes. Tonight, you've heard the story of Elias Thorne. The disappearance, the symbols, the codes, the silence. But stories like his don't end. They expand until someone dares to close the gap. If you felt the weight of this mystery, subscribe to Missing and Mysterious. Share Elias's name. Keep his signal alive. Because the moment we stop listening, the missing disappear twice.